Hey everybody, Rich here, Rich's Custom Marine and Auto. So today we're back working on this 1996 Toyota 4Runner. As you can see there, it's got the 3.4 V6. So this engine has the water pump is leaking, and it also has cam seals that are leaking. I'm not going to go into right now. There's a long back history. Maybe I'll do a whole different video on that. But this is going to be the same as if you guys were going to do a timing belt, and that's why I went ahead and made this video. Is we'll run through how to do the timing belt, water pump, and of course the cam seals. So I'm going to get this thing set up on the tripod and we'll get going here. Alright, so you always want to start by getting your battery disconnected. Guys, you want to do your timing belt on these 3.4s every 60,000 miles. The good news, I guess you could call it, is this is called a non-interference engine. So if for some reason the timing belt does break or skip, the valves won't contact the pistons and cost you basically thousands of dollars the cost of getting a new engine. Alright, so you can take the battery out if you really want to. It gives you a little bit more room, but it's not really a necessity for this job. Now as far as the air box, I really recommend, and we'll be taking that out, because when you start getting the power steering pump kind of back out of your way, and then especially we'll have to get the AC compressor and the bracket off of there, off the engine, because you'll see when we get in there the tensioner that holds tension on that timing belt, the only way to get that thing out of there is have the AC bracket off. That's probably the worst part of the job. So other than that, it's not that terrible. So last night I opened the drain on the bottom of the radiator and let it drip into a bucket. So that's been open all night long. This particular vehicle doesn't have the under shield, the skid plate some people call it. So it's actually a lot easier to access everything. But if yours has that, it's just 4 bolts and then that thing will come right off. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to be able to get the camera in there, is I'm going to take the lower radiator hose loose and let it drip into the bucket while we start taking the top apart. Okay, so at this point we'll go ahead and we'll start getting this, we'll get the air box and the air intake tube out of the way. Got the clamp up here on the throttle body that's either a 10mm or a Phillips, either one will work. And then the clamp down here next to the mass airflow sensor. Same size, same style clamp. Alright, then we got some connectors here. We got the mass airflow connector. This one seems to get stuck on there a little bit. There's a little box down in here that goes to the electronics that I'm going to go ahead and disconnect. There's a little tab here that slides into a keeper on this tube. I'm going to lay this back. There's a harness stay here. You can just use one of these little trim tools, pop that out, and then I just lay that harness off to the side like that. And then we can make sure that's all loose. So now you've got some lines going to your air intake here, into this diffuser and stuff like that. If you're not familiar with these vehicles and you haven't done this, what I recommend doing is taking some tape I usually use the blue painter's tape, but put it around the line and then say put A and then put a piece of tape here that says A. That way when it goes back together, you know A goes to A, then you take your tape off. So we got a line on the front here, like so, and then we have this one coming across, going to the air box. That we'll just tuck out of the way. Alright. So now, got a line in the back here, pops right out. And you kind of got to work this around the cruise control cable, and then you get that out. And then next, there's 3 12mm bolts. Of course, there's the easy one to see here. Trust me guys, as easy as it is to take this airbox out, you'll appreciate the room when you start working on the AC compressor. There's one down right behind the headlight here. Really easy to see, guys. Sorry, I got the camera on tripod, but you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when you go to do this job. And then there's one on the back side. And then this air box will just lift out. Alright, so that gives us a ton of room over there to work. And that's awesome. Alright, so next I'm going to take the clips that hold the spark plug wires on. I'm going to take those off. So basically, lift a little bit and then push back. And these things are kind of brittle, guys, because the heat. So just kind of push back gently and wiggle them, and they'll pop off of there. And you can just let those stay back behind there. We'll go ahead and get this upper radiator hose out of the way. Someone at some point has changed out these clamps. The factory clamps are this style, that they're just a spring clamp. There's a couple schools of thought here. A lot of people think that these worm drive clamps or standard screw type hose clamps are better, and I get that, but right where that screw is, there's actually a pressure point there, which means that on either side of that screw there's light points. So where these clamps, these are more of a pain in the neck, and they are, but they have more uniform tension. And probably seal a little bit better. As you can see, this one's probably a little bit small. They look like they could go either way, but if you reverse this hose, it gets really, really close to the fan right here. I mean, not that there's about a finger width there now, but it's even closer than that, uncomfortably close. So just label, I just put an E with an arrow. Alright, then there's a little keeper over here for spark plug wires on this side, so we can push all of that back. And at this point, I think we'll go ahead and get the belts off. This particular rig has 3. Each accessory, the alternator, the power steering pump, and the air conditioning compressor, they each have their own drive belt. So we'll do that next. Starting with the power steering belt. So we're going to start by this bolt right here. We'll break that loose, and then down on the side, which is, there's no way I'm going to be able to get a video of this for you guys, but down underneath here is where the tension adjuster is, and we'll have to back that off as well. And then let's see, so let me get a flashlight. So back down in there is a nut. You can see it back there, and we'll break that loose, and then you can see the back side of the adjusting threads there. Okay, if you see over the top of that, in the back down there, the bolt head, that's the adjuster. So we're going to grab a socket and we'll get on that, and that'll take the tension off our belt. Okay, so what we're using, guys, so we've got a 14 millimeter deep, 3-inch extension, and that gets us right into that bolt we were talking about. Now what I like to do is pull up on the belt as I'm backing off that adjuster, because that helps pull the power steering pump over. Okay, that'll work for now. One thing I didn't say that I probably should share is what I like to do is get all 3 belts, get the tension off of them, and then I'll work on getting the shroud out of the way and the fan out of the way. I don't like to have the belts pulling tension on that idler, because that's not actually the water pump down there, that's just an idler. And then try and take the bolts loose, because that can damage the studs. So get the tension off your belts, and then you can take the fan off and the shroud and all of that. Alright, so now for the alternator. Somewhat similar deal for the alternator. So this is where you definitely want to make sure you have your battery disconnected, so you don't accidentally touch the hot wire going to the alternator. So we're gonna break loose the top bolt here, and again we're just loosening so that it'll pivot. Another 14 millimeter headed bolt. Break it loose, back it off a couple turns, and then that's fine. And then on the bottom, Again, a very similar setup to the way the power steering pump was, and I'm not going to be able to get you down in there, but it's the same deal where we're going to back off the jam nut and then we'll come in from this side and there's an adjuster in there. We'll back that adjuster off until we get our belt loose. Okay, and that one looks like it's a 12 millimeter.
Because there are endless places that can accidentally expose you to identity. Simply unsafe. One your identity is stolen.
And again, just a couple turns backed off. See if I can locate the adjuster. So the adjuster is right underneath the bottom of that. I've done in the past is I use a 12 millimeter ratchet wrench on there, because there's this positive harness comes down and there's probably about that much room between it and the alternator, but it's a lot easier if you have a ratchet wrench. If not, you can probably get a short socket in there with a ratchet, but then just back that off. Okay. And getting the bottom one, let me get the camera off the tripod so that I can get up in there and show you guys what we got to do there. Alright, so a couple things to show you from underneath. So there is the drain for the radiator, and then of course lower radiator hose, and then it goes up to the water pump neck right there. What we're going to be doing is getting the alternator belt out of our way, or at least the tension off of it at this point. So to do that, there's the small pulley right there. And what we got to do is loosen that nut in the center. And then there's an adjuster, of course, that right there, you can see the bolt head in the center of the screen. And that thing's a bit of a bugger to get to. You can get to it from underneath on the back side of the cross member with a like a wobbly, but I find it easier just to use a ratchet wrench coming from the front. So I'm not able to hold all of this stuff and do that to show you, but I'm going to get that done and then we'll move on. Okay, so I find it's easier just to pull that tensioner pulley off. You can see up there where it goes. So on this vehicle, for whatever reason, the tension adjustment isn't really smooth. So what I had to do is back that bolt off that I showed you earlier. If I can show that again, you can just see it there. And then I had to take my extension and just lightly tap with a hammer, and it slid up finally, even though I had the nut for this pulley completely loose and almost fallen off. So okay, moving on here. The shroud comes off in two pieces. So if you look up in there, there's a clip. There's one of those on each side. You pull those clips off, and then the lower part of that shroud will come off. So these are the clips. you pull up on this side, but then also there's that tab on the back, so you've got to spread this thing with your fingertips or with maybe a flathead screwdriver or something, and then they'll come off of there. And then this lower shroud, it's got some tabs that go in there. Just kind of work that thing back and forth a little bit, and then it'll come out of there, and then that piece will come off. So anyways, guys, I usually tuck the overflow hose over like this. I've had people say, well, you're going to crack it and damage it. Well, guys, if bending that hose like that makes it crack, it was too brittle and needs to be replaced anyway. So that's probably a few bucks at an auto parts store, so no big deal. But as I said, I'm going to get these 10mm headed bolts out and then lift this shroud out of the way, and then I'll put you guys back on the tripod there, and we'll work on getting the fan out. Guys, having one of these electric ratchets is a very nice, handy thing. Especially for the lower bolts on this shroud. Alright, now as long as we keep this as close to the radiator as we can, it'll slide right out of there because of this is where we took that lower piece out. To give you guys a little better idea. So these sit like so, right? And then these are the clips that come in and go over the top. So, and this is what I was telling you earlier, is you kind of have to lift both sides. Now see, in that particular case it actually stayed on this piece, but underneath there it wouldn't do that, so I had to spread them both and get the clip to come off. Now I don't intend to pull this radiator for this job. You absolutely could, and it gives you more room to work in there, obviously. I don't plan on doing that. Mainly, I mean, I guess if you had a manual transmission vehicle, you've already got the coolant drain, 4 bolts that come in from the front, pull that sucker out of your way. But with the automatic vehicles, there's 2 lines going to the bottom of the radiator for transmission cooling. And I'd just rather not lose the fluid. I mean, even though it's minimal because I put caps on the lines, it still just makes a mess. So I'm gonna go without removing it. So next, we'll get the fan off of there. And what I do is I take a screwdriver and go in between one of the mounting nuts and the shaft of the fan to break each one of these loose. Alright, with those 4 nuts off, wiggle this thing around a little bit and then our fan will come off. We can set that aside. Alright, now we can get these pulleys out of the way, which will let all our belts come off. Like so. Next, I'm going to take this tool and pop this connector out of this upper timing cover. And that just tuck that out of your way. That's the cam position sensor harness. And now we can go ahead and take our 10mm socket and remove our cover bolts. So during the diagnostics of trying to figure out where the coolant and oil was coming from, I did remove 2 of the bolts that go here and here. So those are already out and over on my bench. And then there's a 10mm headed bolt right down here that holds the dipstick bracket there. Go ahead and we'll take that loose. Because we need just a little bit of flex on that to be able to get this cover off. So now our cover should come off. Alright, so there's our timing belt, our cam pulleys. Idler, this is the cam position sensor. That is what this wire goes to. So now we're ready to go ahead and we'll unbolt. We'll be moving this around a little bit. But we'll unbolt our power steering pump and then we'll lay it off to the side. Alright, so the adjuster nut that we loosened earlier, we'll take that off. And then the top bolt, now we can rotate the pulley and get through one of the lightning holes in the pulley and we can get this top bolt to come out. Top bolt or the pivot bolt, whichever you prefer. Okay, so what I do is I've got this little piece of rope here. I go around the reservoir. Just have a little loop there that I pull it through. Like so. And then I'll show you guys here in a second what I'm doing or where I'm hooking this to. Okay, so I've gone through a little hole in the fender there, used this little piece of rope, and then it holds that power steering pump up out of the way. And then what I'll do is the rest of this I'll use later on. You'll see on the AC compressor down there. So now we'll go ahead and disconnect this line because this is the other vacuum line that goes to the power steering. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and we'll pull the bracket that holds the power steering off. And then after that, we'll start working on getting the air conditioning compressor off, which is a little bit of a fun task. So just that one nut and that'll come off, and for right now I'm just going to stick the nut back on the threads. It'll have to come off when we pull this idler off, but that way I can keep all that hardware together. Alright, try and get in here as best I can to show you guys this so you can see the AC compressor down there. So right at the tip of my finger there is one of the bolts that we've got to get to. There's one back in the back there, and then just for the fun of it, there's two in the same spot on the bottom. So those are a 12 millimeter headed bolt, and so there's not going to be a whole lot that I can really show you here with this camera wise. So I'm just gonna let this run and get this thing apart, guys. To make this a little easier, break loose the top bolts but leave them in, because you can actually see those, and it'll hold that compressor in place so that the bottom ones don't bind when you're trying to spin them out. And then, because it's a lot easier to get those uppers to come out, as you can see what you're doing. And I actually just leave the bolts in the compressor. I have them backed off, of course, but I just leave them in there. They don't fall out. Some of you guys might be wondering, he's got an electric ratchet, why isn't he using that down in there? Well, I've done that, and it backs out and jams against the frame rail, and then you gotta figure out how to get a long flathead screwdriver in there to get the direction switched on the ratchet so you can get your ratchet back out of there. Alright, so the bottom ones are completely loose now. And we can come back in here and get these top ones. Just a side note there, guys, it goes without saying, but this thing will sit here and just dribble coolant for the whole time that you're doing this. So throw down an old towel or cardboard box, fold it up, flatten, something like that. Or a big pan, if you got a big pan to throw under there, because it's just going to sit there and dribble. The AC compressor on these many jobs that you'll do on this vehicle, the AC compressor adds some time to it. Once you've done it once or twice, it's not so bad. But the first time that I did it, I was like, what in the actual world? What a pain. Okay, and then on top of the compressor, there's a wire going to it. That comes off really easily. That way we make sure we don't damage that. Now this is where I take the other end of this rope just kind of go around this compressor some, and then I'll try and lift it. And pull it towards the fender well. Yeah, my knot slipped some. But that'll kind of let me get in there, because now we got to get in behind there and get this bracket off. So this bracket has 4 bolts on the side, and then the one in front. These are a 14 millimeter headed bolt. Alright guys, so that gets this bracket out of the way. It's actually upside down, it goes like this. You can see where those 4 bolts went that hold it to the block, and then this is where the compressor bolts onto it, and then of course the forward one, and then this is the tensioner that's down on the bottom. This is the one that was difficult to even show you and get to. This is for the AC compressor belt. Okay, so next we're going to get this fan bracket out of the way. I already had those broke loose. Again, people that are used to older V8s and stuff, they're like, that's the water pump. Well, it's just simply a fan pulley bracket, guys. So, now it may not be easy to see from your point of view, but this pulley right here is actually the water pump. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is get this crankshaft pulley out of the way. Before we do that, I'm going to rotate this thing over to top dead center and line up the timing marks, and I'll show you guys that. An important note is you only want to turn this thing clockwise, only turn it to the right, never turn it backwards on this particular engine. So this is a 19 millimeter socket, so let me go get set up for that, and we'll show you how the timing marks get lined up. Alright, so we'll go in here, get that on there. Again, only turn to the right. So now on these 4-stroke engines, the crankshaft turns twice to every 1 turn of the camshaft. So right now, which I'm not even going to show you because it's irrelevant, but the timing mark on the crankshaft is lined up, but our timing marks for our cams are not. So that just simply means we've got to go around, all the way around one more time. And then all 3 should be lined up.
There's more identity theft in the news every day. That's because there are endless places that can accidentally...
And guys, if you're going to do a tune-up when you do this, you may want to go ahead and pull your spark plugs before you do this, because it makes it easier to turn the engine over. Not a huge deal, but just easier. Another habit to make sure is don't ever leave anything on a crankshaft pulley, whether it's a socket, a ratchet, a breaker bar, because if for some reason you get distracted and you're at the point where you're going to come back and try and start it or whatever, that thing's going to be banging around making a mess. Alright, so for our timing marks, try and make this where you guys can see the reference. So somebody put purple paint there and then purple paint there, so you can see that little V. So those are lined up. So the cam for this head's lined up. We come over here to the driver's side. Same thing, we've got some purple paint there. And then there's the V there, and that's lined up. So then we look down here, and we're looking right there, and you can see the white dot. I don't have enough hands, guys, sorry. The white dot is lined up with the 0 down there. So now everything is set to top dead center right now. And at this point, we would be good to remove the belt. We're not going to do that yet, of course, because we've still got to get that pulley off of there, which is what we're going to set up to do next. Alright, so something that I built, this right here, it's something I had made a long time ago for a Subaru, but just a piece of 1/4-inch plate, 2 bolts that are 8mm by 1.25 pitch. These are, I drilled 3/8 holes here, and they're about 2 7/8 of an inch apart, to be able to go into that crankshaft pulley. These bolts were out of a different puller set, that's why they have the goofy nut on there as a spacer. It works, so I use it. And then here I used a hole saw and did an 1.25-inch hole, that way the 19mm socket can go down through there. So the whole reason I did this, the factory tool just has some pins that would basically be kind of like what these are, unthreaded pins that go into the balancer. Well, I built a tool like that, just like that, and it actually pulled the center out of the balancer. I purchased a replacement balancer, and when I was torquing it down, these get torqued to 184 foot-pounds, it pulled the center of the balancer out again, and again, the tool was exactly like the factory tool. So I discovered that those pulleys, the balancers, are threaded 8mm by 1.25, and then that's when I did this. And so the key with building something like this is run these down, make sure they're good and tight, snug, but make sure your bolts are not too long. These will stick through the back of the pulley. So these stick through, with my spacers on there, about 2.5 inches, and these will stick through about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/16, but that's not enough to contact anything and do any damage back there. But guys, once I made this, I've never had any damage to any of the balancers. So get you a piece of 1/4-inch plate steel, and what I'll do is, because this is for a whole different vehicle, when I put this on the front of the rig, I'll just put a big breaker bar in here over to the fender well or to the actual frame, so that as I'm backing that nut off, or when I go to retorque it, it's just locked in here and it can't turn. So just wanted to share that with you. So here's what the rig looks like installed, and now I'm going to go grab a breaker bar or a tire iron or something that I can hold the other side with, and then we'll break that sucker loose. Okay, so here's what we ended up doing is, so that's a tire iron, laid it over here. These lines are not actually pinched by it, it just looks like they are, and then laid it on the fender well. You could put a rag or something there if you're worried about damaging it. And then had the breaker bar and the socket down inside the hole that I showed you guys in the tool earlier. And then we ended up putting a jack handle on that breaker bar, and then we were able to get that thing knocked loose. So again, the main focus here is don't turn the engine backwards, and as long as you don't do that, you'll be fine. So here's the back side of the crankshaft pulley. You can see those bolts I showed you earlier, how much they protrude. You definitely don't want any more than that. Man, maybe I was off a little bit. It's probably more of a 1/4 of an inch. But there you can see the actual setup. Works really well. Recommend you guys make one. It doesn't take very long, and like I said, 1/4 inch plate steel by, I don't know, I think that's 3 inches, and then just build you one of those. It's cheap and keeps you from damaging anything. The cheapest crankshaft pulleys I found on eBay are $80, and they go up to like $378 from Toyota. So you definitely want to, you know, spend $20-30 on a tool that'll keep it from getting damaged. Alright, so I'm going to get this tool off of here and then get set back up over at the engine bay, and we'll continue on. Alright, one more on this crankshaft pulley. You guys are probably like, alright, we get it, man. You made a tool, so what? These holes right here are what the factory specified tool goes into, and this is actually the damper part. So this is rubber mounted in there, and that's what will tear out unless you do what I did. So anyways, the last thing is, so the bolt, Toyota will tell you in their procedure, replace that bolt, replace it, just throw it away, get rid of it. After talking to some Toyota techs, when they do timing belt jobs, they don't ever replace that bolt, and they said the reason that the Toyota procedure says to replace this bolt is because when you go to the dealer or you order one of these online from Yoda Parts or wherever, they already have Loctite on it. So guys, take a wire wheel, clean up this bolt, get the threads nice and clean, put some red Loctite on there, and reuse that bolt. You'll be just fine. And that, again, that's not coming from me. That's actually Toyota dealer techs telling me that. Okay, so now we'll get the lower timing belt cover off, and it's a smaller version of the upper one, but it has the same type of 10mm headed shouldered bolts. Okay, so I want to show you guys. So down here, this bracket right here, that holds that wire harness that goes across. That's actually the main starter lead going over to the starter on the other side. But you have to get this bracket out of the way, and there's a bolt there, and there's a bolt over there, 10mm headed as well, and then those things will come right out of the way. Now with that out of the way, you can get to the bottom bolt of the timing cover. Okay, and then we should have one more up here. Alright, so that gets that off of there and out of our way. Now guys, when you look down in there, we've got a good view of the entire belt. Again, water pump, idler. Sorry, try and get it to focus. This is the tensioner pulley. So this water neck bolts on to the water pump. So the water pump is actually pretty good size in there. And we'll get to that here in a minute. And then of course our camshaft seals are behind these gears, and we'll be pulling this cover off to do that. So I think the next thing we'll do is the tensioner, which is right there. There's two 12mm headed bolts that come up from the bottom, and we'll get those loose. You want to back those off evenly, so like a turn on one, a turn on the other, because it's going to detension the belt, and you don't want to put a lot of stress on one of those bolts and bend it or damage it. And then we'll be ready after that to pull the belt off. The back one broke loose. Now we can work on getting the front one broke loose. Man, I'll tell you what, guys, when LQK put this thing together, they really tightened those suckers. And the part we're doing right now, guys, is the whole reason that we had to take the AC compressor and the attachment bracket off is, trust me, I've tried every way I could think of to get to these bolts with that AC bracket on there, and it's just not possible. So it's just what you gotta do. Now we've got it where there's really not much tension. We can go ahead and back those the rest of the way out. Alright, so now we're ready. We've got our timing marks lined up like we looked at before. Now we're ready to go ahead and take the belt off. These pulleys, the cam pulleys, have a shoulder on them, so it can be difficult to get the belt off. If it's really difficult, which I don't know, I haven't even tried this one yet, we can put a 14mm socket in here and just take this idler pulley off. But let's see what happens if we take it off the bottom. We were able to get it. I do find when I put these back together that it is a lot easier with this off, and we're going to have this off anyways because we got to take this back cover off to get to those cam seals. So also you may be wondering, so the belt has these markings, so this says left cam, this says right cam, and that says CR for crankshaft. So that's to also help you when you go to put this thing back together. You can line these marks up. These marks should line up with your timing mark, which should line up with your timing mark up here. And then the same thing on the bottom. Once you wind that belt all the way around, then you should be able to see the crankshaft mark will be lined up where it should be. So once you've turned the engine over with this, you'll never get those marks lined up again. So those are only for the initial setup of the belt. Now, I've never seen a vehicle that's got 60,000 miles on it that still has these markings. So I mean, this has 150 miles on it, and like I said in the beginning, I'm not going to go into right now why I'm having to do this. This is just an educational video for your guys' purposes only. But yeah, so obviously 150 miles, the marks are still on there. That'll just help us when we go to put this thing back together. Now, timing belt, you want to make sure you don't get it in coolant or oil or anything like that. I wouldn't just take this thing like the The serpentine belts, they are a serpentine belt, but the belts that we took off earlier, those I did just lay on the floor. You won't hurt those. This thing, I'm actually going to go hang this so that it's a little more protected. Okay, next we will go ahead and work on getting the water pump out of there. And we're going to start by getting this thermostat neck off. There's 3 bolts, or 3 nuts actually, 12 millimeter. And those of you that have seen the channel before, you know that I am a stickler for using a torque wrench when you put stuff back together. So we definitely will be using a torque wrench when we reassemble all of this. And it's the only way you can really be certain when you're putting fasteners back in that, one, you're not going to over tighten them and stretch or strip the bolt or nut that you're dealing with, and 2, that you're actually providing the clamping force to the pieces that the factory wanted you to. So just use your torque wrench. Harbor Freight has them even, and they're actually not bad. You do not have to have a Snap-on or Cornwell or whatever torque wrench. I mean, I happen to have one that is a Snap-on digital torque wrench, but I bought that because of having my business here that I have. So there's our thermostat. So what I'm doing here is backing off the water pump bolts a little bit at a time, and looks like we've got all of those. I'll take a quick look here with the mirror and make sure there isn't one on the bottom. Might be one right there that I didn't get broke loose. Alright, so give you guys a look here. At what we're doing. And you can actually see pretty good in there. So we've got all these bolts backed out. We'll go ahead and get ready to get those loose and pull that water pump off of there. And I'm going to go off camera here for a second and take a look and try and verify where the leak was coming from, because the company wanted better verification or a picture trying to show where that leak is coming from. So I'm going to do that off camera because I don't need to bore you guys with all of that, and then I will come back when we go to pull the water pump off of there. Alright, so got all the bolts out of the water pump. Maybe hard to see from there, but they got a couple spots where you can actually pry a little bit on that thing. You want to be really gentle with it. So what I used is I used a seal puller and got in here, just went up against this one boss on the block, and then got that thing to start moving a little bit. So now I'm going to set you guys up on the tripod as I get this water pump the rest of the way off. So, interesting. Couple things to share with you guys here. So, this water pump, you can see right there, it was leaking badly. Also, let's see if we can see. I don't know what that is, OAW or something W. This is not a factory water pump or a factory style. This is just some aftermarket brand of water pump. And the easiest way to tell, guys, is so Aisin, A-I-S, I believe it's I-N, is the OEM manufacturer of the water pumps for these rigs. So they'll have a groove in here, and those factory and factory style water pumps, they don't use a gasket like this. This is horrible. So I'm gonna have a look at what the block. I mean, you can even see where they slopped a bunch of sealant up inside here, one of the passages. I mean, this is not a good part and not good quality work. See how well we can see in there. Now you can kind of see. But yeah, definitely can see a trail down there, which I'll see if I can insert a picture of where this thing was leaking coolant. So anyways, okay, so that does it for that. Now we're gonna go ahead and move on, and we're gonna get our cam sprockets off. Okay guys, what I did is I took the bolts out of this tool that I had earlier, and then I just went and grabbed a couple 3/8 drive sockets and then ran some bolts in there, and that way, same idea, but this goes in like so, fits inside the holes inside the timing gear, and then you can take your socket and break it loose. I'm not a real huge fan of using an impact on certain jobs like this, because the amount of shock that an impact puts is quite a bit. I will use an impact on the crankshaft because I've never had an issue doing that, but I really try not to use an impact on the cam just because I actually have several reasons, but if it spins for some reason, especially if it spins backwards, you don't want to be messing up your valve train or hammering anything. It's just better if it's a more controlled fashion. Okay, so you can see this is labeled left. So a lot of times what guys will do, and I do it as well, is I'll go on the back and I'll just put a D for driver's side. Same thing, but takes any question out if somebody's like left looking at the front, left looking at the back. And on that note, everything on an engine is as though you're in the driver's seat, generally, other than the firing order. The firing order is usually one will be out here because this is the front of the engine. But left and right is considered as though you're sitting in the driver's seat. Okay, that one's labeled as well, but I'll just put a P. Okay, we'll go ahead and pull this idler pulley off. Excess grease sitting in there. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and we'll pull this cam position sensor off, 10 millimeter. These have a locating pin. Sometimes they stick. This one's already wiggling, so it's not going to be an issue, but sometimes they stick and you got to kind of work with them. But so we'll just pull that thing off and we'll just let it lay down. I should be able to put this bolt back in and not have any interference when we pull this rear plate off. And then I'm going to use my electric ratchet, so it's going to get loud, and we'll just zip these. Okay. This thing, I tried to straighten it back. I'll do a lot more straightening now that it's off. We can see the whole reason that we did this job. We've got oil. I'll get you guys in there better so we can actually see it. So there you can see the oil laying in there. I don't know if we'll be able to see anything off the bottom of the cam or the seal, but that's the driver's side. And then on the passenger side, you can see the oil sitting there. And then again up underneath. So also, while I got the camera off the tripod, let's have a look at this water pump issue we were having. And you can just see right down there where the gasket was damaged, and and it was leaking. So yeah, I strongly recommend, guys, if you're gonna do a timing belt water pump on your rig and it's got a 3.4, get the AISIN, AISIN kit, the complete kit, because it comes with idlers, it comes with a tensioner, it comes with the good quality OEM water pump, and it's the way to go. You won't have any issues. So so what I'm going to do next is I'll drill a small hole in each one of these seals, and then I'll run a sheet metal screw in just enough to catch, and then pull those seals out, and then we'll put the new ones in. Alright guys, so I have repainted this back cover and straightened it, put the gears or sprockets back on the camshafts. I did put some blue Loctite on these just to make sure those don't back off, but use that tool like I showed you before, and it'll hold that. And then you want to torque these to 81 foot-pounds. So now here we've got brand new OEM water pump, and as we talked about, guys, AISIN right there. Just got this from the Toyota dealership. Matter of fact, this one actually says Toyota on it right there. But if you get the timing belt kit that comes with the water pump, it won't say Toyota on it, but it will be an AISIN, and it is a factory replacement part. Also, the gaskets that come with that you'll get this one, which this is for your thermostat. So we'll set that aside for right now. And then you'll get this. This is the actual correct gasket. Metal. It's got this raised rubber. I don't know if I'll be able to show that on camera. But yeah, you can see all that black in there. That's the raised rubber. This is the correct gasket, not the paper gasket that other thing came with. So I've scraped that yesterday all clean. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a clean paper towel, put a little bit of brake clean on it, and then I'm just going to wipe around this whole surface. Make sure it's good and clean. So it's actually pretty dirty. Also a tip, there's you guys might not be able to see it, but there's 5 different holes in here going into the front of that engine block. Take some paper towels or newspaper or whatever you got and wad it up and just push it into those holes, so when you're scraping, if you have to scrape a gasket, if you have the OEM gasket, you won't have to. You take this thing off, spray a little brake clean on a rag and wipe it around in there and you're done. But if you have to scrape the gasket like I did, fill those holes up, and that way none of that crud, the old sealant or anything like that will actually get inside your cooling system. Alright, so now we should be able to take our gasket and put it on there. There are two dowels in the front of the engine block that locate the water pump, and so you can probably see where this one and this one are a little bit bigger. So anyways, that's where those locating dowels go. And there are studs down for the thermostat portion, so that'll hold this in place temporarily until we put our bolts in. Like so. Now we'll take our bolts and we'll go ahead and get those started. Now guys, these are all the same length. On some vehicles you got to be really careful because they have different length bolts for different spots. And then like if you get into older V6s and V8s and stuff like that, some of the holes won't have bolts because they go through the timing chain cover and all that, but this one's nice and easy. All the bolts are the same. Alright, so that gets all our bolts started, and then just a reminder that this guy has to go on there. That's the lower radiator hose connector, but it also holds the thermostat in place. Alright, so for the thermostat O-ring, I've already taken it off of there. It just pulls off of there pretty easily. There's a there's a groove in there, and you just push it over the top of that lip on the thermostat, and then work that thing around, and then you're good. According to ALLDATA, if the thermostat has a bleeder, which this one does not, the bleeder would go down. So now we'll go ahead and set this in place in that new water pump. And we've already cleaned this, so we can go ahead and set actually we're going to hold off on that for a second because it'd be a lot easier to put the oil cooler hose on right now. I'll just show you that with this other water pump. So this water pump sits in there like so, and this is where the thermostat goes. This is the oil cooler line that comes on. The line comes in and bends and goes like that. So we'll just slide that back on. Then there's a pinch clamp, and we'll put it on there and go. Alright, so now we got that set. So now we can go ahead and set this water neck on there. And then we got the 3 nuts for that. Okay, so those are ready to torque now. Alright, so torque on those is 14 foot-pounds. What I like to do is I like to go in a step. I'm going to go about 9. So you want to do these diametrically opposed or a crisscross pattern. Guys, it is important that you use the torque wrench on these. So we also want to include the water neck nuts down here because they hold the pump to the block as well as the water neck and thermostat. Now I'll go ahead and torque them, bring them up to the 14 foot-pounds. Okay, so now I'll go around and check them all in a clockwise pattern just to make sure that I didn't miss any. Which was a good thing because I don't know if you guys saw that or not, but the far left one I hadn't got in the sequence. So, alright, so that's all torqued down and ready to go. So now we can go ahead and put our cam position sensor back in. Just make sure this wire, it actually has a little keeper that it's got to go behind here, and this is zip tie. Oil pump where the oil pan sits, get all the oil off of there, and then we should be ready to put the belt back on. Alright guys, so we got our marks on the belt like we talked about before. We'll line those up with our timing marks like we talked about. Okay, so we're lined up with all of our marks. We can go ahead and put that idler back in. We will put a little bit of blue Loctite on there. So that bolt's going to get torqued to 26 foot-pounds. Okay. Alright, so at this point, I'm going to get the camera set up over by my vise, and I'll show you guys how we reset the tensioner. Alright, so here we've got our tensioner, and then we talked about this some before, but there's the holes there. That's a 2 millimeter Allen wrench is the biggest that'll fit in there. So now you want to be, this is what I was telling you guys, you want to be really careful with this. You want to go really slow, so you'll turn it a little bit and give it a second, Just think of this as a really, really strong shock absorber, like I said before. And this is a slow process. If you just start really cranking on that thing, you'll damage it. And then you'll have to go get another one. Eventually, what we'll be able to do is put this Allen wrench in here, and it'll go in here through that hole and all the way out the other side, and then that'll have it all preloaded for when we put this back on the engine. And this is the whole reason that you have to unbolt this thing, which of course, as we talked about before, is why you have to take the AC compressor and the AC compressor bracket off, is because this actually sticks through that bracket, and there's no way to reset this tensioner without removing it. Just a patience game, guys. If you buy a timing belt and water pump kit, it'll come with a new tensioner, and there'll be a wire through there with a loop that you can just kind of wiggle and pull out once you've got it set in there. So you don't have to go through this. You just unbolt this one and you can toss it. Start seeing if we're getting, well, we still got a ways to go. Okay, so if you guys noticed there, it might be hard to see, but I had gone a little bit too far, and so I actually had to back the vise off just a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to back this Allen out to where it's just sticking through there, like so. And then, so that's what you're looking for, guys, right there is. And then you can see not much of the pin sticking out. So that's how you do that. Let's get it installed. Alright, so now we're set up back over here. So there's a little dust cap, and it does get stuck down in there, but this thing, once you've got your Allen wrench set up, you can just slide it over like that and then pop it over the top. So that'll work good. kind of hard. I will take the camera off the tripod here in a minute to show you what I've done. But so it's kind of important. You can see the way these bolts are. So this thing will go up in there like that. It won't go the other way. So you'll have to have it like that. Again, a pretty big proponent of some blue Loctite. Just keeps things from rattling apart. So now with this boot on here, you'll have to kind of push up somewhat firmly. And there's a slot that the Allen wrench that you've got in there will go in. And then get your bolts started. And then that's a 12mm headed bolt. Okay, and we'll torque those to 20 foot-pounds. And we'll just freeze there for a second and see if we can see. But now this belt has a nice amount of tension on it like it's supposed to. So also you can see the water pump bolts in there. You can see the thermostat housing and water neck right there, which comes down to there. And I will show you this. Like we talked about, we have these lined up as they're supposed to be. So I will show you guys that this bottom one Alright, so right there guys, you can see the crankshaft line in the mirror, and it lines up with a little dot right there. So then that's got our timing belt all set up. The next step that we'll do, we're actually going to call it a day here for now because it's kind of late, but the next thing we would do is we'd go ahead and turn our crankshaft bolt here 2 complete turns, and then re-verify that our timing marks are aligned. And again, I want to stress to you that these will no longer be lined up. They're going to be just somewhere else. So you'll be looking at, is this notch lined up with that one? And then the same thing there. And then actually for the crankshaft, you can see the dot and the mark there, and that's how you make sure that's lined up. when you don't have the balancer in place. So again, 2 complete turns of the crankshaft, and then come up here, make sure your notch is lined up with the notch, lined up with the notch, and then down there what I just showed you, the dot. And then you'll also make sure your belt is nice and tensioned. Again, you only want to turn the crankshaft clockwise to the right. And so let's say you turn that 2 turns and you line up your timing mark on the crankshaft down there, and these are off. Not a huge deal. It just means you're a tooth off on the belt. So then you would take your tensioner bolts loose, take your tensioner back over to the vise, recompress it, reset the belt, and then do that whole process again. Reinstall, retorque those to 20 foot-pounds, pull your Allen wrench out, let it tension. Now, that is the whole reason these are on here, is to prevent you from having to do that, because back before they started doing this on the belts, we kind of had to guess, and you would make sure that you had the least amount of slop or play in the belt on this side, and then you'd leave all your play on this side because that's where the tensioner was. So, we'll pick back up after we do the 2 full turns, and we'll take a look at our timing marks together. Alright guys, so next, you always want to make sure you have this washer. This is called the lower timing belt guide, and it's actually got a bend to it, a camber. You want to make sure that the outer edge bends out. That's the direction you put it on there. If you put it the other way, it's going to fray your timing belt and destroy it. So put that thing on there next. Now we can go ahead and put our lower timing cover on. Alright, and then one more. Those get torqued to 80 inch-pounds. Okay, then we'll put our fan pulley bracket on. So this step is the reason we waited on putting the power steering pump on. Primarily because this piece goes on there, the tensioner. And I'll bring the camera in closer here in just a second. Alright, so you can see what we've done down there, guys, and you can see how this bracket sits. This tab goes in this little hole, and then we've just got everything set up here to put our power steering pump in. But now we're going to go ahead and torque this first. need to go back and put the starter wire bolts on. We showed you that earlier. Okay, I'm not actually seeing the torque value for this fan bracket, even though it shows it and everything in there. So I'm going to use 35 because that's what a lot of the other hardware is torqued to, that's that size. Procedure wants us to put the balancer on, actually even before this, but I like to wait on that until I get these covers on. No particular reason, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, we'll go ahead and run all of these in, and then these are torqued to 80 inch-pounds, just like the lower cover was. Alright, I just turned the camera off there for a second because I had to reroute where this wire came out of the rear timing belt cover because it wasn't quite sitting right. Now we can go ahead and get the last bolt in. Make sure the wires aren't pinched here. They're not. Alright, then we can put the bolt in that holds the dipstick tube in place. Alright, so now I'm going to set up my special tool and we'll go ahead and get ready to put that balancer on. Alright, so as we talked about earlier in the video, so if you just make sure that your pulley bolt is nice and clean, like I've done with this one, get all the old Loctite off of it, get you a good quality red Loctite. And you don't have to put a ton of this stuff on there, guys. You can see there, it'll spread out throughout the threads and it'll be fine. Alright, with our rig all set up here, we'll go ahead and torque this to 184 foot-pounds. Alright. Take the rope loose. And then we can pick this thing up, set it right in place, and run this pivot bolt through. Might be easier just to catch it in the bottom one and then the top. Yep. Now this being the pivot bolt, we'll run it down, but we're not going to snug this. And we'll torque it after the belt tension is set. Okay, that'll work. Put the nut on the adjuster. The actual adjuster here on the bottom will leave that quite a bit loose. That way this thing can move as it needs to move. So now we'll go ahead and work on getting the belts set in place. Actually, we need to put this connector on first, so let me work on that. It's got to be repaired, so I'll work on that and then bring you guys back when we're putting the belts on. Alright, so we'll start with the alternator belt. And we've also got to get these pulleys on. Okay. And next one will be power steering. That one doesn't go across the pulley up top here. Set up the power steering. Okay, so at this point we'll go ahead and put the fan on, at least temporarily, because it'll hold the pulley in place. We'll go ahead and snug these down. It may not be the best method to use, but I just take a flathead screwdriver and put it between one of the nuts and the shaft. And that lets me get a good torque on these. If there's one thing you definitely don't want, you don't want that darn fan coming loose. If any of you guys have ever seen that, you'll know what I'm saying. That's a bad deal. That's a mess. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and set up to tension our belts. And once we do that, we can go ahead and put the fan shroud in place. Saving myself some time here and running the adjuster down by hand. And you want about an inch of play in the longest point between the pulleys. There are tension gauges you can buy for the belt, for belts, if you're that uncomfortable. You know, unsure of the right tension. But even if that's the case, you can find something to set a ruler on down on the engine, whether it's the end of a bolt or whatever, and deflect the belt down, not a bunch, but down and up. Like that one actually doesn't need much more. I'm only going to do a little bit more on it. Not going to do much of showing you guys the adjusters because we went over that when it came apart. Not good there. Then we'll go ahead and we'll snug up our adjustment bolt here on the bottom of the power steering pump. And then using a wrench, because when we turn this pulley to tighten those fan bolts, the openings on this pulley are no longer in front of that bolt, so we'll just use a wrench. Alright, so that's got our power steering done. Next, we'll do the next belt in, which is the air conditioning. And again, I'm not going to show a whole lot on that one, other than just a reminder to you guys that I always pull that tensioner pulley off just to make life a lot easier for me. So let me get that done and we'll come back. Okay, and now we'll do the alternator belt. Okay, and then we'll snug down the adjuster nut on it. And then of course the pivot bolt on top. Okay. So that's got our belts tensioned, fans on and tight, everything's good there. So we're ready to set the fan shroud in. Kind of wiggle it around some and start your top bolts. And then you'll want to look underneath and make sure, because there's a clip for the transmission lines that you want to make sure is in the right spot or not between the shroud and the radiator. Ours was a little bit in the way, so now it's not. So now we'll go ahead and get this lower piece of the fan shroud on, and we did talk about this when I took it apart, but you want to make sure these 3 clips go in. You'll see in the fan shroud where they go, and then of course we talked in depth about those guys, so you just want to make sure you get them clipped in properly. Also, while I'm underneath there, I'm going to put this lower radiator hose on, and then we'll work on getting the upper radiator hose on. Alright, so we're ready to put our upper radiator hose on. Okay, get tools out of the way and we'll hook up our overflow line. I made sure the drain valve was closed down there while I was down there, so that once we get done here, we can actually dump some coolant in there and let it start working the air out. So I might have mentioned earlier on when we were taking this thing apart, But if you see green coolant, this didn't have green coolant in it. It had dye, so that we could detect with a black light where the leak was coming from, and that makes it look green. But this is what I used, and I definitely recommend that you use something specific for Toyota, whether you use the 50/50 pre-mix or you mix it yourself. It really doesn't matter, as long as you get the mixture correct. Do not use, really strongly recommend against using, I think Prestone has an antifreeze that says all makes and all models. Don't use that stuff. I think the only way that I would use that stuff is if I was broke down on the side of the highway and somebody said, hey, I got a gallon of this, and it was my only option, I would use that. But use the proper stuff. This vehicle takes a little over 2 gallons, so I put 2 gallons in like I just did, and then I top off with distilled water. Always make sure you use distilled water and not just tap water, anything like that. Distilled water is purified, so it won't have the corrosive properties and cause you future problems in your engine and in your radiator. Alright, so it's topped off. So now we'll move on, and actually it just burped right there, which is kind of cool. And we'll start getting this airbox back in place. Of course, one thing of note is this snout right here. You want to make sure it actually gets clipped onto. You may not be able to see, but there's a plastic tube that goes into the fender there. You want to make sure that it's slid over that. Those were the power steering vacuum lines that I just moved out of the way. And I don't torque these to anything, guys. There's a rubber grommet, so I run it down until it kind of gets a little snug, and with that rubber grommet, they're not going to back off. And work on getting our vacuum lines hooked back up. We still got to get our air intake tube on, of course, but we'll get to that. And after we get the air intake tube on, then we'll get our wire harness hooked up. Ah, had a bee on it. That was exciting. I don't know if you guys just heard that, but it just let a big air bubble out, which is awesome. course, I'm not going to make it very tight. I was grabbing this ratchet way down here because it is definitely overkill for what I'm using it for, but it was quick and easy to grab. Actually, normally I like to use the Phillips screwdriver like I did when I took it apart. Alright, so wire harness comes across, clips into there, it's got a clip into here. Clicks into that module and then clicks into the mass airflow sensor, and that's all set. This goes into the air intake tube there, and now we can work on that. Tube goes on there. This one from the power steering goes there. That. So that should be it. So now at this point, we'll go ahead and connect the battery back up, and I'll check the oil and we'll fire it up. So once you get it up and running, grab your flashlight like I did, go underneath, look up top, look around for leaks, and get it up to temperature. Once you see the bubbles will stop at some point. It's not fully been burped yet, even when those bubbles stop, so you'll have to do a couple heat cycles. And that's normal. It'll just push fluid out like that. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe if that's something you want to do to help support us, and we'll keep putting out stuff like this. Have a great day. Thank you.